Where do you think this leads humanity? We're coming towards the end of the first quarter of a new century. And in our relatively short lifetimes, we have seen a crazy amount of changes. I mean, the amount of changes that have happened technologically, I'd say socially, culturally, politically, in a relatively short number of decades, it blows my mind when I honestly think about it. So when I think towards the next 25, 50, 100 years, I mean, do you just see increased fragmentation going on? Do you think that this is going to just continue to accelerate? Is there going to be something that will bring people back and unite us? We hear so much talk about division and polarization. Where do you think it's going to go?
In my ideal situation, there would be a backlash against where things are going. People will just stop, spending so much time on social media, and that will actually start going out. And the new counterculture will be going out in the real world and meeting people in the real world. That would be the ideal situation, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is, I don't know if you're familiar with the story The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Well, in this story, basically, it's about a guy who goes into the future. He travels far, far into the future. And what's happened in the far future is that humanity has evolved into two subspecies, the Eloi and the Morlocks. And the Morlocks basically live underground, and they spend their lives working physically, doing a lot of labor and building things and all that. And the Eloi, they live on the surface, and they have everything done for them by the Morlocks. And as a result of this, as a result of sort of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of having things done for them, they've lost all of their abilities. Their brains have atrophied, their bodies have atrophied. They're the brains and bodies of children, because they've never had to use their physical bodies. They've never had to use their brains. Having everything done for them has weakened them to the point that they're now helpless. And in the story, basically, it's implied that the Morlocks will eat the Eloi. And I think that something similar could await humanity in the long term, where, because you now have AI, which is essentially going to be able to do pretty much every mental task that humans can do, from sort of mathematical work to writing to art, all of this stuff can be done by AI now. So if you consider, we're on the horizon of AI agents, and AI agents are basically, they are chatbots that can use the internet for you, that can book flights for you, that can, browse the net for you, search stuff for you, do research. They can actually do more than just a normal language model can do. And a lot of people are already starting to outsource their cognition to machines. And I think that a lot of people are going to do this because it's going to be anti-competitive to not do it. Like, people who do this are going to have an edge over people who don't. And so there's going to be a race towards automation of our mental faculties, and a lot of people are going to be increasingly depending on AI to do things for them. If the worst scenario plays out, which I hope it doesn't, but if it does, the worst scenario is that over a long, long period of time, people will gradually lose their mental faculties because they'll be outsourcing their cognition to machines. And the brain is a muscle in a sense. It's not technically a muscle, but it behaves like a muscle in that if you don't use it, you lose it. And so if you are outsourcing all of your faculties to a machine, over time, you're going to become less able to think. You're going to be less able to write. You're going to be less able to do anything other than to outsource. You're going to become an outsourcing machine. I think that what this is going to do is this is going to lead to a lot of people losing their abilities and being dependent on, not just on the machines, but on the people who create the machines. And there's going to be some people out there, I think, who will retain their agency, who will only use machines for things that they couldn't do themselves, but will actually try to, they'll be interested in self-improvement. I think this might be maybe people who are more on the conservative side of things, who will be less embracing of new technology, and will tend to sort of focus on getting back to basics. I think there's going to be a large movement on the conservative side of things of people that are going to be trying to go paleo, They'll be trying to sort of move away from technology and will try to live a more simpler life. And I think that those people, they'll have a disadvantage in the near future, but they'll probably have an advantage in the far future because they will retain their abilities where everybody else has become dependent on machines. And so it's going to be interesting to see where this dynamic between these two groups will go. You know, you'll have one group which probably will be a lot more interested in thinking for themselves and doing things physically, health conscious people. And then you'll have a lot of other people who will be basically outsourcing everything to machines. You'll also probably have a third group of people that are going to be even worse off. And they will be the people that just completely passive in their lives, that are just completely lost in worlds of entertainment, who are just completely living their lives reactively rather than proactively. I think that this is going to be the dividing line between the people in the future: people who live proactively, people who do things themselves, who retain their agency, and people who live reactively, people whose entire lives are just a series of reflex reactions to whatever stimulus they're receiving from their screens or from their prompts. You know, so we're prompting AI now, but AI in the future will be prompting us. So I think there's going to be this split in humanity, and I don't know where that's going to lead, but it's quite a scary prospect.
Yeah, you said a concept that I've spoken about on multiple podcasts actually when I think about this century that we're living in. I have used the term bifurcation a lot in that I think that humanity is going to bifurcate in a way that we've just never seen before. I think in multiple ways. I think there's the obvious technological aspect of it, but I think even with that, it's multi-layered. It's not just AI, it's also robotics and everything that that will entail. I think that's going to impact everything from people's work to economics to relationships, potentially reproduction. I think it's going to have a in terms of mental health, in terms of physical health, I think there's going to be a massive bifurcation. I could say that perhaps we're already in the early stage of the mental and physical health bifurcation, and I see that accelerating. I don't see that converging again, at least not in the short term. It does. I'll add another layer to this as well. As you were speaking, I was thinking that something that is actually going to be a significant factor in that bifurcation, although it may not be obvious to all people, is, and it's not going to perfectly split along these lines, but I think there will definitely be a religious versus secular split in terms of the willingness to embrace some of these technologies, in fact. So I think that the people who are, even in my own personal observation, the people who tend to get like really sort of hype and excited about the concept of like putting a chip in their brain or like AI doing everything or whatever, they tend to be more secular. They tend to either be like outright atheists or, you know, maybe they're spiritual but not religious or what, like that. But they don't tend to be traditionally religious, and they obviously with that they tend to be more liberal. And I find that people who are more conservative slash traditionalist, certainly if they follow a more traditional religion, they tend to have much more of an aversion to all of this stuff. Whether that's wanting to live forever or wanting to put a chip in their brain or wanting to outsource everything to AI. I think it's kind of fascinating how, again, it's not, I'm not saying it's a perfect split, but I think that's going to be a heavy element of it all. And you know, I don't have perfect predictive power at all. The world could go in so many directions, and I'm not going to live to see it all. But I'm just so fascinated by what could transpire in this century. I think I don't know. I think people are underthinking it a bit. I don't think people quite realize just how much could potentially change. I think when we think of the future, we all have you know, a now bias, a recency bias, because it's now is what we know. But I think we tend to think, oh, 30 years from now, everything is going to look kind of like it does now, but a little bit different. And I think, I don't know, maybe in a way, I sort of hope it does. But I could imagine 30, 40, 50 years from now, you know, if we were to just kind of get airdropped into 2065 or 2075, we might just be completely confused by what is going on, in the same way that if you took someone from 1970 and you dropped them into 2025, I think first of all, they'd be wondering what these little rectangles that everyone is carrying around and staring into all the time is. They'd be baffled by just so many things, not just what's visible, but just the way people behave, even perhaps the way people dress, cultural and societal attitudes. They'd just be confused by a lot of things. Maybe even, demographic changes. That's another big thing that's going to happen this century. If you look at birth rates, I mean, if you extrapolate towards 2100, like the makeup of the world itself is going to look very, very different to what people are used to. How many countries are even going to exist? I think when I was born, there were maybe around 170 or so countries officially recognized. Now we're around 200. Who knows? Is it going to be 1,000 countries? Is it going to be 5,000? Is it going to be, the map is not going to look the same. It might in terms of the land masses, but where those borders are, that's also going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the problems with predicting the future is that the human mind thinks linearly, but technological growth is exponential. So, everything that happens in the future is going to be based on technology that we can't even conceive of. Like you sort of alluded to the sort of idea of, people in, say, like medieval times trying to work out what an iPhone is. If you went back in time to the people in medieval times and try to ask them how things would be in the year 2000 or whatever, 2020, they just wouldn't have any concept of the things that exist today. They wouldn't understand Bitcoin. They wouldn't understand AI. They wouldn't understand pretty much anything, the internet, all of these things that we take for granted. And so, we can only go by what our linear brains are saying and looking at the current course of things, but anything could change the course, like in the future. I've been spending a lot of time trying to work out what kinds of technologies could be created from AI, like what new technologies that we haven't really thought of yet could be created from AI. And I've been thinking about a lot of worrying things, been looking at the way that China's been using drones, for instance, and think that for example, the wars in the future will probably be fought mainly with drones. But if you actually ever look at what the military has been looking at, like things like DARPA, they've been looking at miniaturization of drones. So you'll probably have wars, for example, being fought with armies of robotic mosquitoes. And these mosquitoes could, do crazy stuff. You know what I mean? They could easily wipe out humanity. Like if they just went rogue, you have these tiny nanobots that could kill people by entering their bodies and just screwing things up. And they could self-replicate. There's all this kind of crazy scenarios that lie ahead. But I mean, there's also this idea of artificial wombs as well, which I've been thinking about a lot, which I think is probably going to be eventually used. I think we have big problems with birth rates, at the moment. There's in certain areas like Korea, for example, people are below the replacement rate, which means that their population is going to die out within a few generations. And I can't think of any solution to this other than technology. I mean, there's this idea that maybe if people became more religious, then they would sort of have more children. But there's a few problems with that. The first is that it's hard to make people more religious. You can't actually just tell people to be more religious and then make them, more religious. You can't just disseminate Bibles and hope that people read them. The second thing is that there's no proof that this would even work, because if you actually ever look at countries like Poland has one of the lowest birth rates in Europe, and yet it's also one of the most Christian. So it's not just a simple case of, secularism is leading to low birth rates. This seems to be a problem that's much wider than that. It seems to be a problem partially of education. And even that's not the only problem, because again, it's women who are lacking education. There's a recent study which found that it's actually some of the women that actually have low education that are having the fewest children now. Again, it's not the house prices, because house prices are also not correlated with whether people have children. In fact, it's actually the people who are rich who tend to have fewer children than people who are poor. So all of the existing sort of the things that people believed a few years ago about low birth rates have turned out to not be true.
This episode is brought to you by Sambrosa. the best way to get your 8 hours of rest. If, like me, you sometimes struggle with nighttime restlessness and allergies, then Sambrosa Night Syrup could be a game changer for you. Sambrosa contains a natural base of 7 organic herbs, honey, and a small amount of antihistamine. It's effective and soothing with no harsh chemicals, no high fructose corn syrup, and no artificial flavors or dyes. I've been using Sambrosa for several months now, and I can personally vouch for its effectiveness when it comes to improving my quality of rest at night. I also love the fact that they're a family-owned company who share my values of faith, freedom, and integrity. My listeners can try Sambrosa today and get 10% off by going to sambrosa.com/Zuby10. That's sambrosa.com/Zuby10 for 10% off your order. Try Sambrosa today and wake up ready to embrace life's opportunities. Go to sambrosa.com/Zuby10 and try it out.